Hey, what's going on everyone? I'm Sam Lazarus, Creative Director for Rokoko, and today we're going to be going over how to live stream your Rokoko motion capture data that's body, hands, and face from Rokoko Studio out to Unreal Engine. Specifically, we're going to be talking about how to live stream to custom characters. So those are non-metahuman characters that might have an individual, unique naming structure for their skeleton. And we're going to walk through the entire process of how to get your motion capture onto those characters live. I encourage you to also check out our other videos on Unreal Engine, where we've gone through how to do retargeting Rokoko motion capture to characters in Unreal, and also how to retarget to metahumans and how to live stream to metahumans. We already covered live streaming to metahumans in the metahuman video, so check that out if you're looking to live stream to metahumans. The link is going to be down in the description below, as well as a couple links to some assets, some free assets that you can use in your projects. The only other thing I'll say before we get started is that there are always a bunch of different ways to do things in Unreal Engine. This is the workflow that I use personally and that I normally recommend, but it's not to say that there might not be a different way of doing some of the things we're going to do in Unreal Engine, and if those different methods work for you, I encourage you to use them. CG is varied, all the characters that we have access to can be really different, and so this workflow might not cover every single eventuality that you run into, but it should get you started with your live streaming journey. Okay, let's jump into it. Okay, so here I am in a brand new Unreal 5.3 project, and I've already gone ahead and done a couple things to get us started. One of them is I've already brought in our character that we're going to be using to live stream to. This is a character that I got on the Unreal Marketplace, but this same exact workflow and processes would work for a character that you either created or bought on something like CG Trader or TurboSquid or something like that. Any custom character that is not a metahuman, this workflow will work for. So I've already imported this character, but I've also already gone in, and if we go to Edit Plugins and search for Rokoko, I've already enabled the Rokoko Studio Live plugin, and when you do this for the first time, it will require you to restart the project. So I've already gone in and done that. And the other thing that I've done is already downloaded and imported the Rokoko resources folder. So we're not actually really going to be using this folder in this workflow, but it's just a really great set of assets that we've provided for free. I've got the link down in the description below, and all I've done is downloaded the .zip file and then dragged that .zip file into the content folder of my Unreal project. You can see it's right here, Rokoko resources. So because we're not using a metahuman in this project, some of these bone maps and things might not actually open, but it's still just a great folder to have in our project whenever we're working with Rokoko motion capture. So in order to get this character mesh working with Rokoko live streaming, the first thing we need to do is create an actual blueprint. So this is just the skeletal mesh. If I go into my characters folder here, we go to meshes, characters, combines. This is this skeletal mesh asset. It's actually the female version, but this is just a skeletal mesh, and we need to create a blueprint, animation blueprint that we're going to set up all of our live streaming nodes in. So I'm going to delete this out of our scene actually, and this is the skeletal mesh I want to create a blueprint from. So I'm going to right click on this skeletal mesh, go to create, go to anim blueprint. And I'll name this BP Night, and I'd like to put in BPs just so I can always search for it and find the blueprint. And if we open this up, we're going to have our standard animation blueprint. So here's where we're going to build all of our nodes that are going to allow us to live stream out from Rokoko Studio into Unreal Engine. And because I've already enabled that Rokoko plugin, when I right click in our blueprint and I search for Rokoko, we're going to get a bunch of options. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the Rokoko body pose node. I'm going to wire this into my output pose. There we go. And the next thing I'm going to do is just create a couple of variables. So this is similar to what we do with the metahuman, but we're going to get into a couple differences after we add these variables. So I'm going to add two variables. One I'm going to call Rokoko actor name, and I'm going to make this a name variable. And the other variable we're going to add is called Rokoko bone map. And this variable, I'm going to go and I'm going to search. I'm going to type in Rokoko body map data, class reference. So those are the two variables we need and the two different types they need to be. Now I'm going to drag them into my blueprint, get Rokoko actor name, wire this into the Rokoko actor name slot, and then for the bone map, get, and we're going to wire this into the retarget asset slot on this body pose node. And now when we hit compile, we're going to get a bunch of errors, but we also get a few new fields in here that we can fill out. Now, in my case, for the Rokoko actor name, I'm going to add Sam. Make sure to click apply, click away from the field and then click apply. Otherwise, this field will not stay entered. Compile and save. And then we're going to need to add in a bone map. Now, this is where the fact that we have a custom character becomes relevant, because we do not provide these bone maps because there's so many different types of characters and rigged characters out there with different custom skeletons. So we can't provide all the different bone maps for all the different types of characters out there, which is why we're going to have to create this bone map ourselves. The other thing that we're going to need to do is create a pose asset that puts this character into a T-pose. And both of these are different from the metahuman workflow because we already know the metahuman skeleton. We were able to provide, you can see that I have a metahuman bone map. So if you're doing this for a metahuman, we already have the bone map. But because this is a custom character, we need to create both the pose asset that will put our character into a T-pose and the bone map ourselves. So I'm going to save this for now. I'm going to dock this up here. Then we're going to go back to main. And I'm going to go to the main level of my character's folder structure. This is where I like to do it. And the first thing we're going to do is build out that bone map. So I'm going to right click. I'm going to go add blueprint class. And then if we toggle down all classes and we search for Rokoko, we get this Rokoko body map data asset class. So I'm going to click this, select, and this class will only show up again, remember, if you've enabled the Rokoko plugin in the edit plugins folder. So I'm going to call this night bone map, and let's open it up. And you can see when we open it up, I'm going to drag it off, undock it here. We get all of these different fields for all the different bones in a standard skeleton. So we need to fill out these fields with the bone naming conventions for this character. So the way that I'm going to do that is if I go back to my blueprint and I click on this skeleton tab right here, this is going to jump to the skeleton asset for our blueprint. And you can see right here, we've got all the different bones for our character. And if we jump back to our bone map here, you can see that what we have in here by default is different than many of these naming conventions for our character skeleton. So we need to go in and manually fill these out, which is a bit of a pain, but you only have to do it once for each character, and then you can save it and transfer this bone map asset between projects. And so it doesn't end up being that painful. Now, one way that you can do this is you can right click on the name, hit copy, and then just hit Control V and paste it in. I actually like typing them in, so I'm going to type them in individually. I just find it's a little bit faster, although this is pretty quick as well. So when we start filling these out, you can see we have our pelvis or our hip. This is going to be the root bone for our character. In this case, it's the pelvis, and you can tell which is the root bone because if you click on it, it should be on the hips, and it should control the rotation of this entire asset. So we'll change that back. But it is pelvis in our case, right? Pelvis. Then the next two fields are stomach and chest. And what this really means is this is the first bone in your character's spine, and this is the last bone in your character's spine. So you can see we actually have 3 spine bones for this character, but we're only going to be using spine 01 for the stomach. And then for the chest, we're just going to type in spine 03, right? And I'm going to go in and we're going to do this in real time because there's a couple tricks that we can get to as we go through this process. So next up, we got neck and head. In this case, it's actually neck 01. So let's make sure to change that to neck 01. Head is just head, which makes sense. And then we have the left and right arms. So we've got the left arm right here. And let's start with the shoulder, which in this case is the clavicle. So I'm going to type in clavicle 1. Oh no, clavicle L, excuse me. Then upper arm L, lower arm L, and hand L. I'm going to do the same thing for the right, which usually the right and left arms have similar naming conventions, so I don't really need to look, I can just see what I did up here, right? Clavicle R, upper arm R, lower arm R, and hand underscore R. Next, we're going to jump to the legs. So let's look down here at the legs. We have thigh, calf, and then we have a twist bone, which we're going to ignore, and then foot and ball. Generally, you ignore twist bones whenever you're filling out these bone map assets. So in this case, we have thigh L, calf L, skip the twist bone for the calf, we don't need that. And we're just gonna go to foot L and ball L for the toe. The toe is usually ball. We're gonna do the same thing for the right leg. So thigh R, calf R, foot R, and ball R. So there we go. So ignore twist bones and we'll fill these out. And now we get to the slightly more tedious part, which involves the fingers. We want finger motion capture to come through in our live streaming, so we need to fill out all these little finger bones. So fingers are normally organized by proximal, medial, distal, and tip. And usually for many characters, you'll only have 3 finger bones. And these are the proximal, which is the first one, medial, which is the second, and then the distal, which is the third. And again, most characters don't have a tip bone for their fingers. It's going to depend on the specific character and skeleton that you are working with. But in this case, what we're going to be doing is, you can see we have the naming convention for the thumb right here. So I'm going to type in thumb 01 L, thumb 02 L, thumb 03 L. And then importantly for tip, I'm just going to delete this and leave it blank. And when you delete it, it will auto fill in none. And that's what we want for all the tips of all these fingers. And again, this might change if your character does happen to have a tip bone, but generally I always leave this tip blank. So we're going to keep moving. Index 01L, index 02L, index 03L. And I can actually fast forward through this part so you don't have to see it. Now, one thing that I will mention, because I'm usually typing these in manually, or even if you're copying them, as I showed you before, if you have weird results for your live streaming, there's a good chance that one of these were mistyped. And that happens often. So that is a good troubleshooting thing to check. If you get through this whole process and then your character looks really weird, or maybe its arm isn't moving correctly, come back to your bone map, make sure that all these names are actually correct, because oftentimes, you'll forget maybe a number or something, and that means that this third bone on the left index won't be moving at all. And so I need to make sure that these are all actually correct. So that's just something to keep in mind. We'll delete this and keep moving. So there we go, finished. And you can see also, I'll also mention that the way that I set this up is I docked this skeletal mesh, the skeleton tab up here in my main window. And that way I can have the bone map asset up and I can see both of them at the same time, right? So I finished filling these out. I've got none for all the tips. I double checked the naming. It all seems to look right. Although I know I should come back here if things aren't working out right later in the process. And I'll hit compile and save. Now I can close this out. And now when we go back to our blueprint, we select this Rokoko body pose node. And I go into Rokoko bone map, look what we have. We have this knight bone map. So I will select this, make sure to hit apply, compile, save. And I'm actually going to hit compile twice because you saw nothing really happened the first time. Maybe it's a bug. Sometimes that happens. But you should get errors for all those tip bones that were left blank. And that's fine. Again, if there are any bones that you don't want to be affected by your live streaming, you can just leave them blank and you can ignore the warnings. Now, one thing that I will mention is that at least something needs to be entered into this hip field for this to work, for this bone map to be effective, but you could leave any of these other ones blank. And that can allow you to get a little bit creative with where you are live streaming to. But yes, one thing to note is you always need to have something in the pelvis or hip field. Okay, so we've gone in and we've got our bone map all set up, but our character is still in this classic Unreal Engine A pose, and we need our character to be in a T pose. So the way that we're going to do that is I'm going to jump back to this skeleton tab. Remember, the way that you can get here is we're in the blueprint tab right now, click skeleton, and it'll swap us over. And we are going to go through and we are going to move this character skeleton into a T pose, and then we're going to save that pose asset out and add it to our blueprint. So the way that I like to go about doing this is I normally don't affect the collarbones. I usually like where these are naturally, but when it comes to the arm, I'm going to select the upper arm. I'm going to zero out the rotation. I'm going to select the lower arm, zero out the rotation, select the hand, zero out the rotation. And now let's go and make sure that we're actually in a T pose here. So you can see that when I zeroed it out, the bones are actually pointed, backwards, which is not what we want. So I'm going to move this by 30 degrees, and it might be different for your character. It depends. And you can see the hand is also twisted incorrectly. I'm going to grab the hand, twist this 90 degrees, and I'm actually going to even raise up that upper arm slightly so it's really in a T pose out. Now we can do the same thing for our fingers here, which we are going to have to do. So let's zero out all of our finger bones. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. And if we take a look, select our bone, hit F, it'll zero in. Now our finger is pointed out correctly. And it even looks like maybe I need to manually go in and adjust this third bone because we want these fingers to all be lying flat, coming out of the hand with each joint really flat and parallel to the ground. So there we go. I'm going to do the same thing for my middle. And usually what I like to do is I just go through and I zero all of these out. And then I'll go in and make any further adjustments that I need to, which often is the case. Usually, when you zero out these bones, depending on the skeleton, depending on the character, it can change depending on what the custom character you're using, has and what its native bone rotations are. But usually I do have to go in and make some changes, which I'm going to do right now. So I zeroed everything out, but you can see that the tips of my fingers are still kind of bent down, and I really want them to be going out straight. So I'm just going to grab these and just rotate all the tips. And I'm just kind of looking and doing guesswork. The pinky right I didn't even move because it kind of looked okay as it is. And then the last thing that I'll do is you can see on our thumb bone here, we actually want, you can see how the thumb is lying flat and it's pointed, the bottom of the thumb is looking down at the floor. We actually want the thumb to be alongside our fingers here. And you can see I'm actually going in and kind of adjusting this manually, but we want it to look more like this. And essentially what we're doing is we're matching the base pose that Rokoko uses for its avatar. And we want our fingers to be as close to that as possible. So with this thumb lying flat, but turned, as you can see, inwards towards the fingers, and the rest of the fingers all just, going out straight from the palm. So that looks really good. Guess what we're going to do? We're going to go do the exact same thing on the other arm. So I'll time lapse through that maybe. Okay, so I just zeroed everything out, and now we're gonna do the same thing we did with the left arm, which is we're gonna rotate this 30 degrees. Then I'm going to move it up a little bit. Then I'm going to make sure that the hand is actually flat with the floor. And look, we gotta fix this thumb like we did for the other one. Let's turn it 90 degrees, angle it out, angle it down a little bit. And I'm just doing guesswork here, and it's really gonna depend on your model. And you can always go in and adjust these later. Actually, let's move this back up. That looks pretty good, and I still need to fix these tips. And in fact, look at this index finger. It looks like it needs to be rotated a little bit. So we can do some of these things just by eyeballing them. And again, it's really going to depend on each specific different type of character and the skeleton that they have. So this looks really good though. Here we go. Our arms are in a T pose. Fingers are all flat, looks good. The last thing I'm going to do is you can see how the legs are kind of spread apart a little bit. I'm gonna change the interval here for my rotation down to 5. And I'm just gonna bring these a little bit in so that they line up really underneath the hips. For Rokoko motion capture, you want your character's feet to be squarely underneath the hips. So this looks really good. And at this point, what we're gonna do is go to Create Asset, Create Pose Asset, Current Pose. And I'm going to save this in the top level of my Knight folder structure. Again, I might call this Knight T-Pose, something like that. Hit OK, and here we go. And now you can see that we have a pose. It's named pose_0. And if we make this pose 100%, there we go. Our character moves into its T-pose. Now, when you get later, once we actually get motion capture onto this character, there's a chance that maybe we need to make some more adjustments, only by actually testing and getting your live streaming going. Maybe you'll find out that, hey, I actually need the arms to be a little bit more up or something like that. So instead of going through and doing this whole process again on the skeleton, you can go to that pose asset. I could make this 100, so it's in this pose. I could go in and start making further modifications, whatever they may be, adjusting. They probably wouldn't be like this. They would probably be something more like, oh, I need to make the thumb a little bit different or something like that. But the point is, you can take what you've already done, jump into this pose asset, crank it up to 1 or 100, make changes, and then you can go and create a new pose asset. And that will just have another pose name, but you don't have to go back to the start and redo everything if you just need to make one minor adjustment to this pose. So now that this is done, I'm gonna hit save, and we're gonna jump back into our blueprint, and I'm gonna actually peel off the blueprint here so that I can see it, and I can also see our main content folder. And look, I've got this Knight pose asset right here. So I'll just grab this, add it to our blueprint. I'm gonna right click on this pose asset, convert to pose by name, then I'll select it. And remember, the name of the pose we want was pose_0. When I wire this into the component pose and I hit compile, look at that. We have a nice, clean T-pose. Okay, so the last thing that we're gonna do before we actually get our live streaming running is that this character is equipped with blend shapes for facial motion capture. Now, not all characters have blend shapes for facial motion capture, but if they do, we can ensure that our live streaming from Rokoko Studio, if we have facial motion capture, that can also come across. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to right click, we're going to search for Rokoko again, and you can see we have this Rokoko face pose node. So I'm going to add this into our node tree, and I could put this wherever I want. I could wire it in here. I could wire it in back here. The way that I like to do this is I will go like this, and I'm going to put it right here. Oop. And then remember, we need to get that Rokoko actor name also plugged into our face pose. And we'll hit compile, save. And you can see that by default, we have this live link remap on our retarget asset. So if we open up, if we go to the mesh tab for this character, here we have the character, we've got all the materials, we've got all the different sections where we can hide things, but we also have all the morph targets, and you can see that this character is equipped with the Apple ARKit morph targets. And any changes we make, let's make sure to put back to the way we found them. But you can see right here, we have all the standard Apple ARKit facial poses or morphs or blend shapes, whatever you want to call them. So that means that this character is going to work natively with the Apple ARKit facial motion capture. So in this case, we don't need to create a bone map-esque asset to tell Unreal Engine what each of these poses are named for our face, right? We needed to tell Unreal Engine which bone was which in the bone map, but for the face pose, we don't need to do that. And that's because this character specifically has Apple ARKit naming conventions for all these poses. Now you can see it also has a bunch of other poses that are named differently. And if we did want to have our incoming facial motion capture affect different blend shapes, this blink one, for instance, you can see right here, set it back. We go back to the main tab of our project, and we go and create a blueprint class, search for Rokoko. We could create this face remap asset as well. If we wanted to do night face cap, custom naming conventions or retarget to custom blend shapes for a character, we could go in and if we changed jaw open or say eye blink left, remember we have this just blink. If we were just to type in blink here, then any changes to the facial motion capture coming from Rokoko Studio associated with eye blink left would retarget to the blink pose morph or blend shape that we have right here. So I'm not going to do that again in this case because our character has those standard Apple ARKit naming conventions. We don't need to create a custom facial motion capture asset. But if you wanted to, you could, and then you would create a new variable, just like we did for the Rokoko bone map. We would call it Rokoko face cap, and we would make this into a Rokoko face map data class reference. I would drag this in. I would wire it into our retarget asset, and then I would make sure, again, if we did this, compile, save, now we get a new drop-down menu here that we could add a custom bone or facial map to this. But again, we don't need to do that. You never need to do that as long as your character is using standard Apple ARKit blend shapes, which most characters are, but it's just something to mention. Okay, so at this point, we're ready to bring in our Rokoko motion capture and live stream it onto this character. So if we go back to our main level here, and I go and I find my meshes, characters, combines. Remember, I had that BP Night asset that we created. I'm going to drag this into the scene. It looks like it has the wrong mesh asset associated with it, so we can just change this to the night one. And if we go back to the top level here, you can see if we go to general, or rather if we go to all, The animation mode is set to use animation blueprint, and the blueprint is set to that BP night. We need to make sure it's set to the BP night, the blueprint that we set all of that good live streaming nodes up on, right? So this character now is ready to receive Rokoko motion capture. So at this point, we can jump into Rokoko Studio, and I'm actually not going to be piloting. I'm not in a suit right now. But you could put on a suit, have your live motion capture happening. This workflow is the exact same for if you're in a live suit or if you want to live stream over pre-recorded data. It doesn't matter. The only thing that matters, again, is that actor profile name, in this case it's Sam for me, that is the same name. And if I hit Control E with my character selected and then click the Blueprint tab, remember that we set Sam as the Rokoko actor name. That needs to match to the actor profile name that we're using, right? So at this point, again, I'm just going to be using this pre-recorded asset, but it could be a live suit, and I'm just going to press play and let this be running in the background just like it was a live suit. And if we come over to the live streaming tab, we can click activate. If we click this gear button, we get the port information and the forward IP information. These can play a role and be important, but in most cases, you can just kind of ignore this. In this case, let's make a note that's 14043 is the port that we're using. Click activate, and we are now live streaming data out of Rokoko Studio. So if we jump back into Unreal Engine, now we can go to Window, we can go to Virtual Production, Live Link, and if we hit plus source, Rokoko Studio source, and you can see again the network address or the port number is 14043, which is what we're using in Studio. Check Studio, and there we go. You can see it's picking up body and face motion capture coming out of Rokoko Studio. If we go into the blueprint, let's Control E, go into the blueprint, go into here. Look, we actually have our mocap is all coming through, but it's just in this blueprint view. So how do we actually get live motion capture happening without, if we hit play, everything's gonna start, it's gonna be running through, but oftentimes if you're VTubing, you might not want to actually be playing, be in the play editor. I just want to have my motion capture be updated live without actually having to hit play. So the way to do that is I'll just select my character here, and then I'm going to go to under search, update animation in editor. And as soon as I hit that, look at that. We now have live streaming motion capture data coming out of Rokoko Studio and going into Unreal onto our character, including facial motion capture data. Now I might want to raise up my character a little bit to make sure that they're on the ground. And you can see that we don't actually have any physics, so that might be something that you need to enable the play mode. I can also hit Alt S just to simulate. So if we hit Alt S, you can see now I've actually got physics on all my cloth, and if I was VTubing with this character or something, I would have really realistic, cloth happening and everything is working. So this looks really great. That is how you live stream to a character in Unreal Engine. The only other trick that I will mention is that sometimes, there can be a lot of programs running and you can get a slight bit of lag happening between Rokoko Studio and Unreal Engine. Normally this is measured in milliseconds and is not perceptible, but if you are getting any sort of lag, one trick that I've done before, and this is something that we're working on improving in Rokoko Studio, is I can just grab this window and I'll just make this really small. And it just means there's a little bit less computing power happening, rendering out, the scene in my window in Rokoko Studio, and it might speed up some of the lag that you might have between your live suit and your character. But in general, this should be really whip fast, and you should be getting performance that's similar to this, which is pretty much almost precisely 1-to-1. So there you have it. That is how you live stream out of Rokoko Studio to a custom character with a custom skeleton in Unreal Engine. Please put any questions you have down in the comments below and we'll get to them. And also make sure to check out our other two updated tutorials on working with motion capture in Unreal Engine, either for MetaHuman specifically or just for retargeting in general in Unreal Engine. Thanks so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video. Thanks everyone. Bye bye.